Tabletop role-playing games will always have at least one dungeon master or game master to run the entire thing, but the amount of players you can have at your table can vary wildly. Some will do D&D duets where it's just the game master and one player, and others will do an entire table of upwards to 10 plus people. Now in both circumstances, if the game master and all the players at the table are all comfortable with the size of the game, then there's no problem. But if you're just starting out as a game master or even a player and you don't know what your comfort level is for running a game of how many players or being involved with how many players, let me give you some guidelines. Let's look at the pros and cons of a smaller table of roughly around 4 players. For pros, the first thing we're going to look at is that when you have a smaller amount of players to take care of, you also have that much less scheduling to do. And for game masters and players all around the globe, scheduling is the #1 plague on games. So the less scheduling you have to do around players and game masters, the better. Your games can also feel more intimate with less players. The less people at your table, the more time everybody else at that table has to fully delve into their character and have chances to do cool things and say things in character with their character. They don't have to wait their turn in conversation or wait for an actual good moment to try and talk about something when they're waiting for 9 other people at the table. If you have a small group of only 4, they only have to be waiting on 3 other people, and usually that's not too bad, and you can have good conversations with just the 4 of you. When you get into bigger groups, that tends to be a problem, but we'll get to that later. On top of that, if you have a smaller group, space no longer becomes a problem. A lot more people nowadays live in small residential areas like apartment buildings or duplexes, and they don't really have a full home to live in. Thus, if you have a smaller game that you're trying to run with less players, you'd only need a small space and a small kitchen table. This would work perfectly for that. However, the flip side to this, and one of the first cons to running a small game, is your class options. When you're only running a small game of a couple of players, you're only going to have a finite amount of classes available for your game. If someone goes rogue, someone goes monk, someone goes barbarian, and another person goes fighter, that's it. That's all you got. You don't have anything else for range. You don't have any spellcaster heavy ones like wizard or sorcerer. You don't have any healer based classes like druid or cleric. This is all you got. So an easy way around this would be just to load them up with health potions or give them some magic items like Rod of Resurrection that they could use in the event that they start to go down. But that's just something else you're going to have to do as a DM. The next problem is if one of these players cannot make it to a game, you're going to really feel that at the table. Because if you have a table of 4 players and yourself as the DM, and one of those 4 can't make it, you are missing 25% of your game. And it can feel drastically different at the table having only 3 people as opposed to 4. And that's just with 4 players. If you're running a game for 3 people or even 2 people, this only gets worse. But now we move on to the pros of having a larger table when we're looking to start going up to 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 and beyond for player size. Starting with the pros, group dynamic. You have way more people involved in your game, so you have way more personalities and characters interacting with each other that you can create more scenarios. With bigger groups, you can start to have friendships within friendships. You can have a group of friends here and a group of friends here and other interactions going on and all kinds of backwards dealings, and you just have room for a lot more roleplay with a lot more players. You also have a lot more classes now at your game. Now, if you allow double classes, like most people do, that could also happen, but generally a lot of players will say, if you're playing a cleric, I won't also play a cleric. Some will, but most will not. So you'll have far more classes at your table that you can choose magic items for and play out to their strengths and weaknesses. And while scheduling, and we'll get to that in a moment, becomes a fucking nightmare with this many players, if 1 or 2 can't make it and you have a massive table or 6 or 7 players, 1 or 2 missing does not horrendously impact your table. A lot of games can continue playing while missing 1 or 2 people when you have a group the size of 6 or 7. You still have far more than enough players to continue playing your game depending on how your game is run. But also, once again, the flip side of the pros we were talking about, cons number 1 is scheduling. You have far more people to schedule around, you have far more work schedules and school and all that to take into consideration, and trying to get 1 day for even 3 hours a week for 6, maybe 7 or 8 or hell even more, as many as you want to go, is going to become a fucking nightmare. And this only gets worse the moment you start talking to people who are in college and up. Because not all adults work 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. I myself don't even do that. So you can find a group that all works Monday to Friday 9 to 5 and you can get yourself an afternoon on the weekdays or even 1 day on the weekends. Hats off to you. You are fantastic and you've been blessed. Most people will not get that. The next con is size. If you are running that big of a group, you need that big of a space and that big of a table. And also, there's gonna be a lot of noise going on at your table, and if you're in a small quarters place where the walls and the floor are paper thin, your neighbors will know whenever one of them rolls a nat 20. When I started my first campaign of Storm King's Thunder, I had 7 players at my game, granted only 6 at the table and 1 was playing remotely through webcam, but we didn't have enough space. We played in a rented hall with folded tables put together so that we could all get our books, our food, and everything together, and that's how we played for a whole year. It was fun, it was great, don't get me wrong, and scheduling worked out fantastically for us, but not everybody's going to have that option. Most people are only going to have their kitchen table, and if you can't fit 6 or 7 people at your kitchen table, you're going to need to either trim down your player group or find somewhere else to play. And lastly, for cons of a big group is that sometimes, depending on the players and how they roleplay, some players can feel left out. Because if you have 5 players who are really into roleplay and they love talking in character about lots of different things, and you have one person who's maybe a little bit newer or maybe is just very introverted and plays their characters as such and doesn't say too much, they're probably going to feel left out from time to time because they don't feel like they can voice anything because there's always somebody else talking because there's so many people at the table. And that's something that other players and primarily yourself as the GM are going to have to look out for to make sure everybody at the table is being heard and gets to voice their opinions and have a role in the discussions. But lastly, let's point out the elephant in the room. Playing online. If you choose to run your games online through Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, Discord, whatever you'd like, you can eliminate a lot of the problems we've talked about today. Not having a kitchen table or even a space to play for that many people? Done. It's all online. Not enough spaces for people to park their cars because you live in an apartment complex? Done. Everyone's online. Can everyone start at 4 but somebody can't make it till 5 because they have a very long commute from their place to wherever you're playing games? Done. Online. Online solves many issues talked about today, but it also brings up a few more itself. The first thing about playing online is I'd recommend playing with both webcams and microphones. Most people will have microphones for their computer or even their laptop built into it, but not a lot of people have webcams these days. Now granted, a webcam is not mandatory, but I still believe you can have far better interactions with other players and their characters that they are role-playing when you can see their facial reactions and actually see them. But not everybody has a webcam or even wants to fork out money for a webcam, so this will become a problem. And even if they do have microphones, usually the ones built into laptops are not great quality. So you're gonna have to deal with the quality problem and having to ask people over and over again, sorry, I didn't quite hear you, can you say that again? After they just had an emotional speech, but 50% of it was lost in microphone quality. There's also far more risk of distractions with online play because you are in your own home and you have all your comforts around you, like your cell phone, Facebook notifications, YouTube videos playing in the background, everything else going on around you to distract you from playing the game in front of you. But for a lot of people, especially during the pandemic, online play was their only option and still is for a lot of people. So once again, you're just going to have to learn to be accommodating and try your best to make the game work as best as you can under whatever conditions you decide to go with. My 2 biggest recommendations out of all of this is to look at how big of a space and table you have for your players and what is the availability of your players. If you don't have that big of a table and you don't have that big of a space or you can't get access to one, I would keep your game small. Do not try to cram 6 players to your tiny little 4-person kitchenette. It will not go well. And lastly, availability is the biggest hindrance of so many games. If you have 1 or even 2 players whose availability is rather flaky and may not be able to make it all the time, add more players to your game. Because in the event that they have to cancel some sessions, you don't have to cancel an entire session because a lot of your group is missing. With a larger group, a few people missing doesn't horrendously impact the entire game. You can still play. But if you only have 3 players and 2 of those players' availability is flaky and they both end up not being able to come up to a session, you have 1 player left. And that's not going to work very well. Now, if you have pros and cons to any of the stuff that I've talked about today that I did not voice, please listen down in the comment section below so we can add to this for future GMs to look through and take note of. And if this video was helpful to you, please leave a like down below and I will see you all later. Skål! Well, look at you waiting till the end of the video. Hey, do you want 10% off of dice? Go to adventuredice.ca, use code Valkyrie at checkout for 10% off.